Section 16 of Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Part 2, Section 16, Chapters 78 through 83. Chapter 78. After I had let my statue cool for 2 whole days, I began to uncover it by slow degrees. The first thing I found was that the head of Medusa had come out most admirably, thanks to the air vents, for, as I had told the Duke, it is the nature of fire to ascend. Upon advancing farther, I discovered that the other head, that, namely, of Perseus, had succeeded no less admirably, and this astonished me far more, because it is at a considerably lower level than that of the Medusa. Now the mouths of the mould were placed above the head of Perseus and behind his shoulders, and I found that all the bronze my furnace contained had been exhausted in the head of this figure. It was a miracle to observe that not one fragment remained in the orifice of the channel, and that nothing was wanting in the statue. In my great astonishment, I seemed to see in this the hand of God, arranging and controlling all. I went on uncovering the statue with success, and ascertained that everything had come out in perfect order, until I reached the foot of the right leg on which the statue rests. There, the heel itself was formed, and going farther, I found the foot apparently complete. This gave me great joy on the one side, but was half unwelcome to me on the other, merely because I had told the Duke that it could not come out. However, when I reached the end, it appeared to me that the toes and the little piece above them were unfinished, so that about half the foot was wanting. Although I knew that this would add a trifle to my labour, I was very well pleased, because I could now prove to the Duke how well I understood my business. It is true that far more of the foot than I expected had been perfectly formed. The reason of this was that, from causes I have recently described, the bronze was hotter than our rules of art prescribe. Also that I had been obliged to supplement the alloy with my pewter cups and platters, which no one else, I think, had ever done before. Having now ascertained how successfully my work had been accomplished, I lost no time in hurrying to Pisa, where I found the Duke. He gave me a most gracious reception, as did also the Duchess, and although the major domo had informed them of the whole proceedings, their Excellencies deemed my performance far more stupendous and astonishing when they heard the tale from my own mouth. When I arrived at the foot of Perseus, and said it had not come out perfect, just as I previously warned His Excellency, I saw an expression of wonder pass over his face, while he related to the Duchess how I had predicted this beforehand. Observing the Princess to be so well disposed towards me, I begged leave from the Duke to go to Rome. He granted it in most obliging terms, and bade me return as soon as possible to complete his Perseus, giving me letters of recommendation meanwhile to his ambassador, Averardo Serristori. We were then in the first years of Pope Giulio de' Monti. Chapter 79. Before leaving home, I directed my work people to proceed according to the method I had taught them. The reason of my journey was as follows. I had made a life-sized bust in bronze of Bindo Altoviti, the son of Antonio, and had sent it to him at Rome. He set it up in his study, which was very richly adorned with antiquities and other works of art, but the room was not designed for statues or for paintings, since the windows were too low, so that the light coming from beneath spoiled the effect they would have produced under more favourable conditions. It happened one day that Bindo was standing at his door, when Michel Agnolo Buonarroti the sculptor passed by, so he begged him to come in and see his study. Michel Agnolo followed, and on entering the room and looking round, he exclaimed, "Who is the master who made that good portrait of you in so fine a manner? You must know that that bust pleases me as much, or even more, than those antiques. and yet there are many fine things to be seen among the latter. If those windows were above instead of beneath, the whole collection would show to greater advantage, and your portrait, placed among so many masterpieces, would hold its own with credit." No sooner had Michel Agnolo left the house of Bindo than he wrote me a very kind letter, which ran as follows: "My dear Benvenuto, I have known you for many years as the greatest goldsmith of whom we have any information, and henceforth I shall know you for a sculptor of like quality. I must tell you that Master Bindo Altoviti took me to see his bust in bronze, and informed me that you had made it. I was greatly pleased with the work, but it annoyed me to notice that it was placed in a bad light, for if it was suitably illuminated, it would show itself to be the fine performance that it is." This letter abounded with the most affectionate and complimentary expressions toward myself, and before I left for Rome I showed it to the Duke, who read it with much kindly interest and said to me: "Benvenuto, if you write to him and persuade him to return to Florence, I will make him a member of the 48." Accordingly, I wrote a letter full of warmth, and offered in the Duke's name 100 times more than my commission carried; but not wanting to make any mistake, I showed this to the Duke before I sealed it, saying to his most illustrious Excellency: "Prince, perhaps I have made him too many promises." He replied: "Michel Agnolo deserves more than you have promised, and I will bestow on him still greater favours." To this letter he sent no answer, and I could see that the Duke was much offended with him. Chapter 80. When I reached Rome, I went to lodge in Bindo Altoviti's house. He told me at once how he had shown his bronze bust to Michel Agnolo, and how the latter had praised it. So we spoke for some length upon this topic. I ought to narrate the reasons why I had taken this portrait. Bindo had in his hands 1,200 golden crowns of mine, which formed part of 5,000 he had lent the Duke. 4,000 were his own, and mine stood in his name, while I received that portion of the interest which accrued to me. This led to my taking his portrait, and when he saw the wax model for the bust, he sent me 50 golden scudi by a notary in his employ, named Ser Giuliano Pacali. I did not want to take the money, so I sent it back to him by the same hand, saying at a later time to Bindo: "I shall be satisfied if you keep that sum of mine for me at interest, so that I may gain a little on it." When we came to square accounts on this occasion, I observed that he was ill disposed towards me, since, instead of treating me affectionately according to his previous wont, he put on a stiff air, and although I was staying in his house, he was never good-humoured, but always surly. However, we settled our business in a few words. I sacrificed my pay for his portrait, together with the bronze, and we arranged that he should keep my money at 15% during my natural life. Chapter 81. One of the first things I did was to go and kiss the Pope's feet, and while I was speaking with His Holiness, Messer Averardo Serristori, our Duke's envoy, arrived. I had made some proposals to the Pope, which I think he would have agreed upon, and I should have been very glad to return to Rome on account of the great difficulties which I had at Florence. But I soon perceived that the ambassador had countermined me. Then I went to visit Michel Agnolo Buonarroti, and repeated what I had written from Florence to him in the Duke's name. He replied that he was engaged upon the fabric of St. Peter's, and that this would prevent him from leaving Rome. I rejoined that, as he had decided on the model of that building, he could leave its execution to his man Urbino, who would carry out his orders to the letter. I added much about future favours, in the form of a message from the Duke. Upon this, he looked me hard in the face and said with a sarcastic smile: "And you? To what extent are you satisfied with him?" Although I replied that I was extremely contented, and was very well treated by His Excellency, he showed that he was acquainted with the greater part of my annoyances, and gave as his final answer that it would be difficult for him to leave Rome. To this I added that he could not do better than to return to his own land, which was governed by a prince renowned for justice, and the greatest lover of the arts and sciences who ever saw the light of this world. As I have remarked above, he had with him a servant of his who came from Urbino, and had lived many years in his employment, rather as valet and housekeeper than anything else. This indeed was obvious, because he had acquired no skill in the arts. Consequently, while I was pressing Michel Agnolo with arguments he could not answer, he turned round sharply to Urbino as though to ask him his opinion. The fellow began to bawl out in his rustic way: "I will never leave my master Michel Agnolo's side till I shall have flayed him, or he shall have flayed me." These stupid words forced me to laugh, and without saying farewell, I lowered my shoulders and retired. Chapter 82. The miserable bargain I had made with Bindo Altoviti, losing my bust and leaving him my capital for life, taught me what the faith of merchants is. So I returned in bad spirits to Florence. I went at once to the palace to pay my respects to the Duke, whom I found to be at Castello, beyond Ponte Arifredi. In the palace I met Messer Pier Francesco Ricci, the major domo, and when I drew nigh to pay him the usual compliments, he exclaimed with measureless astonishment, "Oh, are you come back?" And with the same air of surprise, clapping his hands together, he cried, "The Duke is at Castello," then turned his back and left me. I could not form the least idea why the beast behaved in such an extraordinary manner to me. Proceeding at once to Castello, and entering the garden where the Duke was, I caught sight of him at a distance. But no sooner had he seen me than he showed signs of surprise, and intimated that I might go about my business. I had been reckoning that His Excellency would treat me with the same kindness, or even greater, as before I left for Rome. So now, when he received me with such rudeness, I went back, much hurt, to Florence. While resuming my work and pushing my statue forward, I racked my brains to think what could have brought about this sudden change in the Duke's manner. The curious way in which Messer Sforza and some other gentlemen close to His Excellency's person eyed me, prompted me to ask the former what the matter was. He only replied with a sort of smile: "Benvenuto, do your best to be an honest man, and have no concern for anything else." A few days afterwards, I obtained an audience of the Duke, who received me with a kind of grudging grace, and asked me what I had been doing at Rome. To the best of my ability, I maintained the conversation, and told him the whole story about Bindo Altoviti's bust. It was evident that he listened with attention, so I went on talking about Michel Agnolo Buonarroti. At this he showed displeasure, but Urbino's stupid speech about the flaying made him laugh aloud. Then he said, "Well, it is he who suffers," and I took my leave. There can be no doubt that Ser Pier Francesco, the major domo, must have served me some ill turn with the Duke, which did not, however, succeed. For God, who loves the truth, protected me, as He hath ever saved me, from a sea of dreadful dangers, and I hope will save me till the end of this my life, however full of trials it may be. I march forward, therefore, with a good heart, sustained alone by His divine power, nor let myself be terrified by any furious assault of fortune or my adverse stars. May only God maintain me in His grace. Chapter 83. I must beg your attention now, most gracious reader, for a very terrible event which happened. I used the utmost diligence and industry to complete my statue, and went to spend my evenings in the Duke's wardrobe, assisting there the goldsmiths who were working for His Excellency. Indeed, they laboured mainly on designs which I had given them. Noticing that the Duke took pleasure in seeing me at work and talking with me, I took it into my head to go there sometimes, also by day. It happened upon one of those days that His Excellency came as usual to the room where I was occupied, and more particularly because he heard of my arrival. His Excellency entered at once into conversation, raising several interesting topics, upon which I gave my views so much to his entertainment that he showed more cheerfulness than I had ever seen in him before. All of a sudden one of his secretaries appeared, and whispered something of importance into his ear, whereupon the Duke rose and retired with the official into another chamber. Now the Duchess had sent to see what his Excellency was doing, and her page brought back this answer: "The Duke is talking and laughing with Benvenuto, and is in excellent good humour." When the Duchess heard this, she came immediately to the wardrobe, and not finding the Duke there, took a seat beside us. After watching us at work a while, she turned to me with the utmost graciousness, and showed me a necklace of large and really very fine pearls. On being asked by her what I thought of them, I said it was in truth a very handsome ornament. Then she spoke as follows: "I should like the Duke to buy them for me. So I beg you, my dear Benvenuto, to praise them to him as highly as you can." At these words I disclosed my mind to the Duchess with all the respect I could, and answered: "My lady, I thought this necklace of pearls belonged already to your most illustrious Excellency. Now that I am aware that you have not yet acquired them, it is right, nay more, it is my duty to utter what I might otherwise have refrained from saying, namely, that my mature professional experience enables me to detect very grave faults in the pearls, and for this reason I could never advise your Excellency to purchase them." She replied: "The merchant offers them for 6,000 crowns, and were it not for some of those trifling defects you speak of, the rope would be worth over 12,000. To this I replied that even were the necklace of quite flawless quality, I could not advise anyone to bid up to 5,000 crowns for it, for pearls are not gems. Pearls are but fish's bones, which in the course of time must lose their freshness. Diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires, on the contrary, never grow old. These four are precious stones, and these it is quite right to purchase." When I had thus spoken, the Duchess showed some signs of irritation, and exclaimed: "I have a mind to possess these pearls, so prithee take them to the Duke and praise them up to the skies, even if you have to use some words beyond the bounds of truth. Speak them to do me service, it will be well for you." I have always been the greatest friend of truth and foe of lies, yet, compelled by necessity, unwilling to lose the favour of so great a princess, I took those confounded pearls sorely against my inclination, and went with them over to the next room, whither the Duke had withdrawn. No sooner did he set eyes upon me than he cried: "O Benvenuto, what are you about here?" I uncovered the pearls and said: "My lord, I am come to show you a most splendid necklace of pearls, of the rarest quality, and truly worthy of your Excellency. I do not believe it would be possible to put together 80 pearls which could show better than these do in a necklace. My counsel, therefore, is that you should buy them, for they are in good sooth miraculous." He responded on the instant: "I do not choose to buy them. They are not pearls of the quality and goodness you affirm. I have seen the necklace, and they do not please me." Then I added: "Pardon me, Prince. These pearls exceed in rarity and beauty any which were ever brought together for a necklace." The Duchess had risen, and was standing behind a door, listening to all I said. Well, when I had praised the pearls 1,000-fold more warmly than I have described above, the Duke turned towards me with a kindly look and said: "Oh, my dear Benvenuto, I know that you have an excellent judgment in these matters. If the pearls are as rare as you certify, I should not hesitate about their purchase, partly to gratify the Duchess and partly to possess them, seeing I have always need of such things, not so much for her Grace as for the various uses of my sons and daughters." When I heard him speak thus, having once begun to tell fibs, I stuck to them with even greater boldness. I gave all the colour of truth I could to my lies, confiding in the promise of the Duchess to help me at the time of need. More than 200 crowns were to be my commission on the bargain, and the Duchess had intimated that I should receive so much, but I was firmly resolved not to touch a farthing, in order to secure my credit, and convince the Duke I was not prompted by avarice. Once more his Excellency began to address me with the greatest courtesy. I know that you are consummate judge of these things. Therefore, if you are the honest man I always thought you, tell me now the truth." Thereat I flushed up to my eyes, which at the same time filled with tears, and said to him, "My lord, if I tell your most illustrious Excellency the truth, I shall make a mortal foe of the Duchess. This will oblige me to depart from Florence, and my enemies will begin at once to pour contempt upon my Perseus, which I have announced as a masterpiece to the most noble school of your illustrious Excellency. Such being the case, I recommend myself to your most illustrious Excellency." End of section 16. Of Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Part 2, Section 17, Chapters 84 through 88. Chapter 84. The Duke was now aware that all my previous speeches had been, as it were, forced out of me. So he rejoined, "If you have confidence in me, you need not stand in fear of anything whatever." I recommenced, "Alas, my lord, what can prevent this coming to the ears of the Duchess?" The Duke lifted his hand in sign of troth pledge, and exclaimed, "Be assured that what you say will be buried in a diamond casket." To this engagement upon honour, I replied by telling the truth according to my judgment, namely, that the pearls were not worth above 2,000 crowns. The Duchess, thinking we had stopped talking, for we now were speaking in as low a voice as possible, came forward and began as follows: "My lord, do me the favour to purchase this necklace, because I have set my heart on them, and your Benvenuto here has said he never saw a finer row of pearls." The Duke replied, "I do not choose to buy them." "Why, my lord, will not your Excellency gratify me by buying them?" "Because I do not care to throw my money out of the window." The Duchess recommenced, "What do you mean by throwing your money away, when Benvenuto, in whom you place such well-merited confidence, has told me that they would be cheap at over 3,000 crowns? Then the Duke said, "My lady, my Benvenuto here has told me that, if I purchase this necklace, I shall be throwing my money away, inasmuch as the pearls are neither round nor well matched, and some of them are quite faded. To prove that this is so, look here, look there. Consider this one, and then that. The necklace is not the sort of thing for me." At these words, the Duchess cast a glance of bitter spite at me, and retired with a threatening nod of her head in my direction. I felt tempted to pack off at once and bid farewell to Italy. Yet my Perseus being all but finished, I did not like to leave without exposing it to public view. But I ask everyone to consider in what a grievous plight I found myself. The Duke had given orders to his porters in my presence that if I appeared at the palace, they should always admit me through his apartments to the place where he might happen to be. The Duchess commanded the same men, whenever I showed my face at that palace, to drive me from its gates. Accordingly, no sooner did I present myself than these fellows left their doors and bade me begone. At the same time, they took good care lest the Duke should perceive what they were after, for if he caught sight of me before those wretches, he either called me or beckoned me to advance. At this juncture, the Duchess sent for Bernardoni, the broker, of whom she had so often complained to me, abusing his good-for-nothingness and utter worthlessness. She now confided in him as she had previously done in me. He replied, "My princess, leave the matter in my hands." Then the rascal presented himself before the Duke with that necklace in his hands. No sooner did the Duke set eyes on him than he bade him begone. But the rogue lifted his big ugly voice, which sounded like the braying of an ass through his huge nose, and spoke to this effect: "Ah, my dear lord, For heaven's sake, buy this necklace for the poor Duchess, who is dying to have it, and cannot indeed live without it." The fellow poured forth so much of this stupid nonsensical stuff that the Duke's patience was exhausted, and he cried: "Oh, get away with you, or blow your chaps out till I smack them." The knave knew very well what he was after, for if by blowing out his cheeks or singing La Bella Franceschina he could bring the Duke to make that purchase, then he gained the good grace of the Duchess, and to boot his own commission, which rose to some hundreds of crowns. Consequently, he did blow out his chaps. The Duke smacked them with several hearty boxes, and, in order to get rid of him, struck rather harder than his wont was. The sound blows upon his cheeks not only reddened them above their natural purple, but also brought tears into his eyes. All the same, while smarting, he began to cry, "Lo, my lord, a faithful servant of his prince, who tries to act rightly, and is willing to put up with any sort of bad treatment, provided only that poor lady have her heart's desire." The Duke tired of the ribald fellow. Either to recompense the cuffs which he had dealt him, or for the Duchess's sake, whom he was ever most inclined to gratify, cried out: "Get away with you, with God's curse on you! Go, make the bargain. I am willing to do what my Lady Duchess wishes." From this incident we may learn to know how evil fortune exerts her rage against a poor right-minded man, and how the strumpet luck can help a miserable rascal. I lost the good graces of the Duchess once and for ever, and thereby went close to having the Duke's protection taken from me. He acquired that thumping fee for his commission, and to boot their favour. Thus it will not serve us in this world to be merely men of honesty and talent. Chapter 85. About this time the War of Siena broke out, and the Duke, wishing to fortify Florence, distributed the gates among his architects and sculptors. I received the Prater Gate and the little one of Arno, which is on the way to the mills. The Cavaliere Bandinello got the gate of San Friano, Pascalino d'Ancona the gate at San Pier Gattolini. Giulian di Bacchio d'Agnolo, the woodcarver, had the gate of San Giorgio. Particino, the woodcarver, had the gate of Santo Nicolo. Francesco da San Gallo, the sculptor, called Il Malgola, got the gate of Santa Croce, and Giovan Battista, surnamed Il Tasso, the gate Pinti. Other bastions and gates were assigned to diverse engineers, whose names I do not recollect, nor indeed am I concerned with them. The Duke, who certainly was at all times a man of great ability, went round the city himself upon a tour of inspection, and when he had made his mind up, he sent for Lantanzio Gorini, one of his paymasters. Now this man was to some extent an amateur of military architecture, so His Excellency commissioned him to make designs for the fortifications of the gates, and sent each of us his own gate drawn according to the plan. After examining the plan for mine, and perceiving that it was very incorrect in many details, I took it and went immediately to the Duke. When I tried to point out these defects, the Duke interrupted me and exclaimed with fury: "Benvenuto, I will give way to you upon the point of statuary, but in this art of fortification I choose that you should cede to me. So carry out the design which I have given you." To these brave words I answered as gently as I could, and said: "My lord, your most illustrious Excellency has taught me something even in my own fine art of statuary. Inasmuch as we have always exchanged ideas upon that subject, I beg you then to deign to listen to me upon this matter of your fortifications, which is far more important than making statues. If I am permitted to discuss it also with your Excellency, you will be better able to teach me how I have to serve you." This courteous speech of mine induced him to discuss the plans with me, and when I had clearly demonstrated that they were not conceived on a right method, he said: "Go then and make a design yourself, and I will see if it satisfies me." Accordingly, I made 2 designs according to the right principles for fortifying those 2 gates, and took them to him, and when he distinguished the true from the false system, he exclaimed good-humouredly: Go and do it in your own way, for I am content to have it so." I set to work then with the greatest diligence. Chapter 86. There was on guard at the gate of Prato a certain Lombard captain. He was a truculent and stalwart fellow of incredibly coarse speech, whose presumption matched his utter ignorance. This man began at once to ask me what I was about there. I politely exhibited my drawings, and took infinite pains to make him understand my purpose. The rude brute kept rolling his head, and turning first to one side and then to the other, shifting himself upon his legs and twirling his enormous mustachios. Then he drew his cap down over his eyes and roared out, "Zounds! Deuce take it! I can make nothing of this rigmarole." At last the animal became so tiresome that I said, "Leave it then to me, who do understand it," and turned my shoulders to go about my business. At this he began to threaten me with his head, and, setting his left hand on the pommel of his sword, tilted the point up and exclaimed, "Hullo, my master! You want perhaps to make me cross blades with you?" I faced round in great fury, for the man had stirred my blood, and cried out, "It would be less trouble to run you through the body than to build the bastion of this gate." In an instant we both set hands to our swords without quite drawing, for a number of honest folk, citizens of Florence, and others of them courtiers, came running up. The greater part of them rated the captain, telling him that he was in the wrong, that I was a man to give him back as good as I got, and that if this came to the Duke's ears it would be the worst for him. Accordingly he went off on his own business, and I began with my bastion. After setting things in order there, I proceeded to the other little gate of Arno, where I found a captain from Cesena, the most polite, well-mannered man I ever knew in that procession. He had the air of a gentle young lady, but at need he could prove himself one of the boldest and bloodiest fighters in the world. This agreeable gentleman observed me so attentively that he made me bashful and self-conscious, and seeing that he wanted to understand what I was doing, I courteously explained my plans. Suffice it to say that we vied with each other in civilities, which made me do far better with this bastion than with the other. I had nearly finished the two bastions, when an inroad of Piero Strozzi's people struck such terror into the country folk of Prato that they began to leave it in a body, and all their carts, laden with the household goods of each family, came crowding into the city. The number of them was so enormous, cart jostling with cart, and the confusion was so great, that I told the guards to look out lest the same misadventure should happen at this gate as had occurred at the gate of Turin. For if we had once cause to lower the portcullis, it would not be able to perform its functions, but must inevitably stick suspended upon one of the wagons. When that big brute of a captain heard these words, he replied with insults, and I retorted in the same tone. We were on the point of coming to a far worse quarrel than before. However, the folk kept us asunder, and when I had finished my bastions, I touched some score of crowns, which I had not expected, and which were uncommonly welcome. So I returned with a blithe heart to finish my Perseus. Chapter 87. During those days, some antiquities had been discovered in the country round Arezzo. Among them was the Chimera, that bronze lion which is to be seen in the rooms adjacent to the great hall of the palace. Together with the Chimera, a number of little statuettes, likewise in bronze, had been brought to light. They were covered with earth and rust, and each of them lacked either head or hands or feet. The Duke amused his leisure hours by cleaning up these statuettes himself with certain little chisels used by goldsmiths. It happened on one occasion that I had to speak on business to His Excellency, and while we were talking he reached me a little hammer, with which I struck the chisels the Duke held, and so the figures were disengaged from their earth and rust. In this way we passed several evenings, and then the Duke commissioned me to restore the statuettes. He took so much pleasure in these trifles that he made me work by day also, and if I delayed coming, he used to send for me. I very often submitted to His Excellency that if I left my Perseus in the daytime, several bad consequences would ensue. The first of these, which caused me the greatest anxiety, was that, Seeing me spend so long a time upon my statue, the Duke himself might get disgusted, which indeed did afterwards happen. The other was that I had several journeymen who, in my absence, were up to two kinds of mischief. First, they spoilt my piece, and then they did as little work as possible. These arguments made His Excellency consent that I should only go to the palace after 24 o'clock. I had now conciliated the affection of His Excellency to such an extent that every evening when I came to him he treated me with greater kindness. About this time the new apartments were built toward the Lions. The Duke then, wishing to be able to retire into a less public part of the palace, fitted up for himself a little chamber in these new lodgings, and ordered me approach to it by a private passage. I had to pass through his wardrobe, then across the stage of the great hall, and afterwards through certain little dark galleries and cabinets. The Duchess, however, after a few days, deprived me of this means of access by having all the doors upon the path I had to traverse locked up. The consequence was that every evening when I arrived at the palace, I had to wait a long while, because the Duchess occupied the cabinets for her personal necessities. Her habit of body was unhealthy, and so I never came without incommoding her. This and other causes made her hate the very sight of me. However, notwithstanding great discomforts and daily annoyances, I persevered in going. The Duke's orders, meanwhile, were so precise that no sooner did I knock at those doors than they were immediately opened, and I was allowed to pass freely where I chose. The consequence was that occasionally, while walking noiselessly and unexpectedly through the private rooms, I came upon the Duchess at a highly inconvenient moment, bursting then into such a furious storm of rage that I was frightened. She cried out, "When will you ever finish mending up those statuettes? Upon my word, this perpetual going and coming of yours has grown to be too great a nuisance." I replied as gently as I could, "My lady and sole mistress, I have no other desire than to serve you loyally and with the strictest obedience. This work to which the Duke has put me will last several months. So tell me, most illustrious Excellency, whether you wish me not to come here any more. In that case I will not come, whoever calls me. Nay, should the Duke himself send for me, I shall reply that I am ill, and by no means will I intrude again." To this speech she made answer, "I do not bid you not to come, nor do I bid you to disobey the Duke, but I repeat that your work seems to me as though it would never be finished." Whether the Duke heard something of this encounter, or whatever the cause was, he began again as usual. Toward 24 o'clock he sent for me, and his messenger always spoke to this effect: "Take good care, and do not fail to come, for the Duke is waiting for you." In this way I continued, always with the same inconveniences, to put in an appearance on several successive evenings. Upon one occasion, among others, arriving in my customary way, the Duke, who had probably been talking with the Duchess about private matters, turned upon me in a furious anger. I was terrified and wanted to retire, but he called out, "Come in, friend Benvenuto, go to your affairs. I will rejoin you in a few moments." While I was passing onward, Don Garzia, then quite a little fellow, plucked me by the cape, and played with me as prettily as such a child could do. The Duke looked up delighted, and exclaimed, "What pleasant and friendly terms my boys are on with you!" Chapter 88. While I was working at these bagatelles, the Prince, and Don Giovanni, and Don Arnando, and Don Garzia kept always hovering around me, teasing me whenever the Duke's eyes were turned. I begged them for mercy's sake to hold their peace. They answered, "That we cannot do." I told them, "What one cannot is required of no one, so have your will, along with you." At this, both Duke and Duchess burst out laughing. Another evening, after I had finished the small bronze figures which are wrought into the pedestal of Perseus, that is to say, the Jupiter, Mercury, Minerva, and Danae, with the little Perseus seated at his mother's feet, I had them carried into the room where I was wont to work, and arranged them in a row, raised somewhat above the line of vision, so that they produced a magnificent effect. The Duke heard of this, and made his entrance sooner than usual. It seems that the person who informed His Excellency praised them above their merit, using terms like far superior to the ancients and so forth. Wherefore the Duke came talking pleasantly with the Duchess about my doings. I rose at once and went to meet them. With his fine and truly princely manner he received me, lifting his right hand, in which he held as superb a pear-graft as could possibly be seen. "Take it, my Benvenuto," he exclaimed. "Plant this pear in your garden." To these words I replied with a delighted gesture, "Oh, my lord, does your most illustrious Excellency really mean that I should plant it in the garden of my house?" "Yes," he said, "in the garden of the house which belongs to you. Have you understood me?" I thanked His Excellency and the Duchess in like manner, with the best politeness I could use. After this, they both took seats in front of the statues, and for more than 2 hours went on talking about nothing but the beauties of the work. The Duchess was wrought up to such an enthusiasm that she cried out, "I do not like to let those exquisite figures be wasted on the pedestal down there in the piazza, where they will run the risk of being injured. I would much rather have you fix them in one of my apartments, where they will be preserved with the respect due to their singular artistic qualities." I opposed this plan with many forcible arguments, but when I saw that she was determined I should not place them on the pedestal where they now stand, I waited till next day and went to the palace about 22 o'clock. Ascertaining that the Duke and Duchess were out riding, and having already prepared the pedestal, I had the statues carried down and soldered them with lead into their proper niches. Oh, when the Duchess knew of this, how angry she was! Had it not been for the Duke, who manfully defended me, I should have paid dearly for my daring. Her indignation about the pearls, and now again about this matter of the statues, made us so contrived that the Duke abandoned his amusements in our workshop. Consequently, I went there no more, and was met again with the same obstructions as formerly whenever I wanted to gain access to the palace. End of section 17. Of Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Part 2, Section 18, Chapters 89 through 95. Chapter 89. I returned to the loggia, whither my Perseus had already been brought, and went on putting the last touches to my work, under the old difficulties always, that is to say, lack of money and 100 untoward accidents, the half of which would have cowed a man armed with adamant. However, I pursued my course as usual. And one morning, after I had heard Mass at San Piero Sharaggio, that brute Bernardoni, broker, worthless goldsmith, and by the Duke's grace purveyor to the mint, passed by me. No sooner had he got outside the church than the dirty pig let fly 4 cracks which might have been heard from San Miniato. I cried, "Yah! Pig! Poltroon! Donkey! Is that the noise your filthy talents make?" and ran off for a cudgel. He took refuge on the instant in the mint, while I stationed myself inside my house door, which I left ajar, setting a boy at watch upon the street to warn me when the pig should leave the mint. After waiting some time, I grew tired, and my heat cooled. Reflecting then that blows are not dealt by contract, and that some disaster might ensue, I resolved to wreak my vengeance by another method. The incident took place about the feast of our San Giovanni, 1 or 2 days before. So I composed 4 verses, and stuck them up in an angle of the church, where people go to ease themselves. The verses ran as follows: "Here lieth Bernardoni, ass and pig, spy, broker, thief, in whom Pandora planted all her worst evils, and from thence transplanted into that brute Boacchio's carcass big. Both the incident and the verses went the round of the palace, giving the Duke and Duchess much amusement. But before the man himself knew what I had been up to, crowds of people stopped to read the lines and laughed immoderately at them. Since they were looking towards the Mint and fixing their eyes on Bernardoni, his son, Maestro Bacchio, taking notice of their gestures, tore the paper down with fury. The elder bit his thumb, shrieking threats out with that hideous voice of his, which comes forth through his nose. Indeed, he made a brave defiance. Chapter 90. When the Duke was informed that the whole of my work for the Perseus could be exhibited as finished, he came one day to look at it. His manner showed clearly that it gave him great satisfaction. But afterwards he turned to some gentlemen attending him and said, "Although this statue seems in our eyes a very fine piece, still it has yet to win the favour of the people. Therefore, my Benvenuto, before you put the very last touches on, I should like you, for my sake, to remove a part of the scaffolding on the side of the piazza, some day toward noon, in order that we may learn what folk think of it. There is no doubt that when it is thrown open to space and light, it will look very differently from what it does in this enclosure." I replied with all humility to his Excellency, "You must know, my lord, that it will make more than twice as good a show. Oh, how is it that your most illustrious Excellency has forgotten seeing it in the garden of my house? There, in that large extent of space, it showed so bravely that Bandinello, coming through the garden of the Innocents to look at it, was compelled, in spite of his evil and malignant nature, to praise it, he who never praised aught or anyone in all his life. I perceive that your Excellency lends too ready an ear to that fellow." When I had done speaking, he smiled ironically and a little angrily, yet he replied with great kindness, "Do what I ask, my Benvenuto, just to please me." When the Duke had left, I gave orders to have the screen removed. Yet some trifles of gold, varnish, and various other little finishings were still wanting. Wherefore I began to murmur and complain indignantly, cursing the unhappy day which brought me to Florence. Too well I knew already the great and irreparable sacrifice I made when I left France, nor could I discover any reasonable ground for hope that I might prosper in the future with my prince and patron. From the commencement to the middle and the ending, everything that I had done had been performed to my great disadvantage. Therefore it was with deep ill humour that I disclosed my statue on the following day. Now it pleased God that, on the instant of its exposure to view, a shout of boundless enthusiasm went up in commendation of my work, which consoled me not a little. The folk kept on attaching sonnets to the posts of the door, which was protected with a curtain, while I gave the last touches to the statue. I believe that on the same day when I opened it a few hours to the public, more than 20 were nailed up, all of them overflowing with the highest panegyrics. Afterwards, when I once more shut it off from view, every day brought sonnets with Latin and Greek verses, for the University of Pisa was then in vacation, and all the doctors and scholars kept vying with each other who could praise it best. But what gratified me most, and inspired me with most hope of the Duke's support, was that the artists, sculptors and painters alike, entered into the same generous competition. I set the highest value on the eulogies of that excellent painter, Jacopo Pontormo, and still more on those of his able pupil Bronzino, who was not satisfied with merely publishing his verses, but sent them by his lad, Sandrino's hand, to my own house. They spoke so generously of my performance, in that fine style of his which is most exquisite, that this alone repaid me somewhat for the pain of my long troubles. So then I closed the screen, and once more set myself to finishing my statue. Chapter 91. The great compliments which this short inspection of my Perseus had elicited from the noble school of Florence, though they were well known to the Duke, did not prevent him from saying, "I am delighted that Benvenuto has had this trifling satisfaction, which will spur him on to the desired conclusion with more speed and diligence. Do not, however, let him imagine that, when his Perseus shall be finally exposed to view from all sides, folk in general will be so lavish of their praises. On the contrary, I am afraid that all its defects will then be brought home to him, and more will be detected than the statue really has. So let him arm himself with patience." These were precisely the words which Bandinello had whispered in the Duke's ears, citing the works of Andrea del Verrocchio, who made that fine bronze of Christ and St. Thomas on the front of Or Saint Michel. At the same time, he referred to many other statues, and dared even to attack the marvellous David of divine Michele Agnolo Buonarroti, accusing it of only looking well if seen in front. Finally, he touched upon the multitude of sarcastic sonnets which were called forth by his own Hercules and Cacus, and wound up with abusing the people of Florence. Now the Duke, who was too much inclined to credit his assertions, encouraged the fellow to speak thus, and thought in his own heart that things would go as he had prophesied, because that envious creature Bandinello never ceased insinuating malice. On one occasion it happened that the gallows bird Bernardoni, the broker, was present at these conversations, and in support of Bandinello's calumnies he said to the Duke, "You must remember, Prince, that statues on a large scale are quite a different dish of soup from little figures. I do not refuse him the credit of being excellent at statuettes and miniature, but you will soon see that he cannot succeed in that other sphere of art." To these vile suggestions he added many others of all sorts, plying his spy's office, and piling up a mountain of lies to boot. Chapter 92. Now it pleased my glorious Lord and immortal God that at last I brought the whole work to completion, and on a certain Thursday morning I exposed it to the public gaze. Immediately, before the sun was fully in the heavens, there assembled such a multitude of people that no words could describe them. All with one voice contended which should praise it most. The Duke was stationed at a window low upon the first floor of the palace, just above the entrance. There, half hidden, he heard everything the folk were saying of my statue. After listening through several hours, he rose so proud and happy in his heart that he turned to his attendant, Messer Sforza, and exclaimed: "Sforza, go and seek out Benvenuto. Tell him from me that he has delighted me far more than I expected. Say too that I shall reward him in a way which will astonish him, so bid him be of good courage." In due course, Messer Sforza discharged this glorious embassy, which consoled me greatly. I passed a happy day, partly because of the Duke's message, and also because the folk kept pointing me out as something marvellous and strange. Among the many who did so were two gentlemen, deputed by the Viceroy of Sicily to our Duke on public business. Now these two agreeable persons met me upon the piazza. I had been shown them in passing, and now they made monstrous haste to catch me up. Then, with caps in hand, they uttered an oration so ceremonious that it would have been excessive for a pope. I bowed, with every protestation of humility. They meanwhile continued loading me with compliments, until at last I prayed them, for kindness' sake, to leave the piazza in my company, because the folk were stopping and staring at me more than at my Perseus. In the midst of all these ceremonies, they went so far as to propose that I should come to Sicily, and offered to make terms which should content me. They told me how Fra Giovan Agnolo de' Servi had constructed a fountain for them, complete in all parts, and decorated with a multitude of figures, but it was not in the same good style they recognized in Perseus, and yet they had heaped riches on the man. I would not suffer them to finish all their speeches, but answered: "You give me much cause for wonder, seeking as you do to make me quit the service of a prince who is the greatest patron of the arts that ever lived, and I too here in my own birthplace, famous as the school of every art and science. Oh, if my soul's desire had been set on lucre, I could have stayed in France with that great monarch Francis, who gave me 1,000 golden crowns a year for board, and paid me in addition the price of all my labour. In his service I gained more than 4,000 golden crowns the year." With these and such like words I cut their ceremonies short, thanking them for the high praises they had bestowed upon me, which were indeed the best reward that artists could receive for their labours. I told them they had greatly stimulated my zeal, so that I hoped, after a few years were past, to exhibit another masterpiece, which I dared believe would yield far truer satisfaction to our noble school of Florence. The two gentlemen were eager to resume the thread of their complimentary proposals, whereupon I, lifting my cap and making a profound bow, bade them a polite farewell. Chapter 93. When 2 more days had passed, and the chorus of praise was ever on the increase, I resolved to go and present myself to the Duke, who said with great good humour: "My Benvenuto, you have satisfied and delighted me, but I promise that I will reward you in such wise as will make you wonder, and I tell you that I do not mean to delay beyond tomorrow." On hearing this most welcome assurance, I turned all the forces of my soul and body to God, fervently offering up thanks to Him. At the same moment I approached the Duke, and almost weeping for gladness, kissed his robe. Then I added: "O my glorious Prince, true and most generous lover of the arts and of those who exercise them, I entreat your most illustrious Excellency to allow me 8 days first to go and return thanks to God, for I alone know what travail I have endured, and that my earnest faith has moved Him to assist me. In gratitude for this and all other marvellous mercies, I should like to travel 8 days on pilgrimage, continually thanking my immortal God, who never fails to help those who call upon Him with sincerity." The Duke then asked me where I wished to go. I answered: "Tomorrow I shall set out for Vallombrosa, thence to Camaldoli and the Ermo. Perhaps I shall proceed to the Bagni di Santa Maria, and perhaps so far as Sestile, because I hear of fine antiquities to be seen there. Then I shall retrace my steps by San Francesco della Vernia, and still with thanks to God, return light-hearted to your service." The Duke replied at once with cheerful kindness: "Go and come back again, for of a truth you please me, but do not forget to send a couple of lines by way of memorandum, and leave the rest to me." I wrote 4 lines that very day, in which I thanked His Excellency for expected favours, and gave these to Messer Sforza, who placed them in the Duke's hands. The latter took them, and then handed them to Messer Sforza, remarking: "See that you put these lines each day where I can see them, for if Benvenuto comes back and finds I have not dispatched his business, I think that he will murder me." Thus laughing, His Excellency asked to be reminded. Messer Sforza reported these precise words to me on the same evening, laughing too, and expressing wonder at the great favour shown me by the Duke. He pleasantly added: "Go, Benvenuto, and come again quickly, for indeed I am jealous of you." Chapter 94. In God's name, then, I left Florence, continually singing psalms and prayers in His honour upon all that journey. I enjoyed it extremely, for the season was fine in early summer, and the country through which I travelled, which I had never seen before, struck me as marvellously beautiful. Now I had taken with me to serve as guide a young workman in my employ, who came from Bagno and was called Cesare. Thanks to him, then, I received the kindest hospitality from his father and all his family, among whom was an old man of more than 70, extremely pleasant in his conversation. He was Cesare's uncle, a surgeon by profession and a dabbler in alchemy. This excellent person made me observe that Bagni contained mines of gold and silver, and showed me many interesting objects in the neighbourhood, so that I enjoyed myself as much as I have ever done. One day, when we had become intimate and he could trust me, he spoke as follows: "I must not omit to tell you a thought of mine, to which His Excellency might with advantage pay attention. It is, that not far from Camaldoli there lies a mountain pass so ill defended that Piero Strozzi could not only cross it without risk, but might also seize on Poppy unmolested." Not satisfied with this description, He also took a sheet of paper from his pouch, upon which the good old man had drawn the whole country, so that the seriousness of the danger could be manifest upon inspection of the map. I took the design and left Bagno at once, travelling homeward as fast as I could by Prato Magno and San Francesco della Vernia. On reaching Florence, I only stopped to draw off my riding boots and hurried to the palace. Just opposite the Badia I met the Duke, who was coming by the palace of the Podesta. When he saw me, he gave me a very gracious reception, and showing some surprise, exclaimed, "Why have you come back so quickly? I did not expect you for 8 days at least." I answered, "The service of your most illustrious Excellency brings me back, else I should very willingly have stayed some few days longer on my journey through that lovely country." "Well, and what good news have you?" said he. I answered, "Prince, I must talk to you about things of the greatest importance which I have to disclose." So I followed him to the palace, and when we were there, he took me privately into a chamber where we stayed a while alone together. I then unfolded the whole matter and showed him the little map, with which he seemed to be much gratified. When I told His Excellency that one ought to take measures at once, he reflected for a little while and then said, "I may inform you that we have agreed with the Duke of Urbino that he should guard the pass, but do not speak about it." Then he dismissed me with great demonstrations of good will, and I went home. Chapter 95. Next day I presented myself, and, after a few words of conversation, the Duke addressed me cheerfully. "Tomorrow, without fail, I mean to dispatch your business. Set your mind at rest then." I, who felt sure that he meant what he said, waited with great impatience for the morrow. When the longed-for day arrived, I betook me to the palace, and as it always happens that evil tidings travel faster than good news, Messer Jacopo Guidi, secretary to His Excellency, called me with his wry mouth and haughty voice. Drawing himself up as stiff as a poker, he began to speak to this effect: "The Duke says he wants you to tell him how much you ask for your Perseus." I remained dumbfounded and astonished, yet I quickly replied that it was not my custom to put prices on my work, and that this was not what His Excellency had promised me 2 days ago. The man raised his voice, and ordered me expressly, in the Duke's name, under the penalty of his severe displeasure, to say how much I wanted. Now I had hoped not only to gain some handsome reward, trusting to the mighty signs of kindness shown me by the Duke, but I had still more expected to secure the entire good graces of His Excellency, seeing I never asked for anything, but only for his favour. Accordingly, this wholly unexpected way of dealing with me put me in a fury, and I was especially enraged by the manner which that venomous toad assumed in discharging his commission. I exclaimed that if the Duke gave me 10,000 crowns I should not be paid enough, and that if I had ever thought things would come to this haggling, I should not have settled in his service. Thereupon the surly fellow began to abuse me, and I gave it him back again. Upon the following day, when I paid my respects to the Duke, he beckoned to me. I approached, and he exclaimed in anger, "Cities and great palaces are built with 10,000s of ducats." I rejoined, "Your Excellency can find multitudes of men who are able to build you cities and palaces, but you will not, perhaps, find one man in the world who can make a second Perseus." Then I took my leave without saying or doing anything farther. A few days afterwards the Duchess sent for me, and advised me to put my difference with the Duke into her hands, since she thought she could conduct the business to my satisfaction. On hearing these kindly words, I replied that I had never asked any other recompense for my labours than the good graces of the Duke, and that His Most Illustrious Excellency had assured me of this. It was not needful that I should place in their Excellencies' hands what I had always frankly left to them from the first days when I undertook their service. I further added that if His Most Illustrious Excellency gave me but a crazia, which is worth 5 farthings, for my work, I should consider myself contented, provided only that His Excellency did not deprive me of his favour. At these words the Duchess smiled a little and said, "Benvenuto, you would do well to act as I advise you." Then she turned her back and left me. I thought it was my best policy to speak with the humility I have above described, yet it turned out that I had done the worst for myself, because, albeit she had harboured some angry feelings toward me, she had in her a certain way of dealing which was generous. End of section 18. Section 19 of Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Part 2, Section 19, Chapters 96 through 99. Chapter 96. About that time, I was very intimate with Girolamo degli Albizzi, commissary of the Duke's militia. One day this friend said to me, "O Benvenuto, it would not be a bad thing to put your little difference of opinion with the Duke to rights. And I assure you that if you repose confidence in me, I feel myself the man to settle matters. I know what I am saying. The Duke is getting really angry, and you will come badly out of the affair. Let this suffice. I am not at liberty to say all I know." Now, subsequently to that conversation with the Duchess, I had been told by someone, possibly a rogue, that he had heard how the Duke said upon some occasion which offered itself, "For less than 2 farthings I will throw Perseus to the dogs, and so our differences will be ended." This then made me anxious, and induced me to entrust Girolamo degli Albizzi with the negotiations, telling him anything would satisfy me, provided I retained the good graces of the Duke. That honest fellow was excellent in all his dealings with soldiers, especially with the militia, who are for the most part rustics, but he had no taste for statuary, and therefore could not understand its conditions. Consequently, when he spoke to the Duke, he began thus: "Prince, Benvenuto has placed himself in my hands, and has begged me to recommend him to your Excellency." The Duke replied, "I too am willing to refer myself to you, and shall be satisfied with your decision." Thereupon Girolamo composed a letter, with much skill and greatly to my honour, fixing the sum which the Duke would have to pay me at 3,500 golden crowns in gold, and this should not be taken as my proper recompense for such a masterpiece, but only as a kind of gratuity, enough to say that I was satisfied, with many other phrases of like tenor, all of which implied the price which I have mentioned. The Duke signed this agreement as gladly as I took it sadly. When the Duchess heard, she said, "It would have been better for that poor man if he had placed himself in my hands. I could have got him 5,000 crowns in gold." One day, when I went to the palace, she repeated these same words to me in the presence of Messer Alamanno Salviati, and laughed at me a little, saying that I deserved my bad luck. The Duke gave orders that I should be paid 100 golden crowns in gold per month until the sum was discharged, and thus it ran for some months. Afterwards, Messer Antonio de' Nobili, who had to transact the business, began to give me 50, and sometimes later on he gave me 25, and sometimes nothing. Accordingly, when I saw that the settlement was being thus deferred, I spoke good-humouredly to Messer Antonio, and begged him to explain why he did not complete my payments. He answered in a like tone of politeness, yet it struck me that he exposed his own mind too much. Let the reader judge. He began by saying that the sole reason why he could not go forward regularly with these payments was the scarcity of money at the palace. But he promised, when cash came in, to discharge arrears. Then he added, "Oh heavens! If I did not pay you, I should be an utter rogue." I was somewhat surprised to hear him speak in that way, yet I resolved to hope that he would pay me when he had the power to do so. But when I observed that things went quite the contrary way, and saw that I was being pillaged, I lost temper with the man, and recalled to his memory, hotly and in anger, what he had declared he would be if he did not pay me. However, he died, and 500 crowns are still owing to me at the present date, which is nigh upon the end of 1566. There was also a balance due upon my salary, which I thought would be forgotten, since 3 years had elapsed without payment. But it so happened that the Duke fell ill of a serious malady, remaining 48 hours without passing water. Finding that the remedies of his physicians availed nothing, it is probable that he betook himself to God, and therefore decreed the discharge of all debts to his servants. I too was paid on this occasion, yet I never obtained what still stood out upon my Perseus. Chapter 97. I had almost determined to say nothing more about that unlucky Perseus, but a most remarkable incident, which I do not like to omit, obliges me to do so, wherefore I must now turn back a bit, to gather up the thread of my narration. I thought I was acting for the best when I told the Duchess that I could not compromise affairs which were no longer in my hands, seeing I had informed the Duke that I should gladly accept whatever he chose to give me. I said this in the hope of gaining favour, and with this manifestation of submissiveness I employed every likely means of pacifying his resentment, for I ought to add that a few days before he came to terms with Albizzi, the Duke had shown he was excessively displeased with me. The reason was as follows. I complained of some abominable acts of injustice done to me by Messer Alfonso Quistelli, Messer Jacopo Polverino of the Exchequer, and more than all, by Sir Giovan Battista Brandini of Volterra. When, therefore, I set forth my cause with some vehemence, the Duke flew into the greatest rage conceivable. Being thus in anger, he exclaimed, "This is just the same as with your Perseus when you asked those 10,000 crowns. You let yourself be blinded by mere cupidity. Therefore I shall have the statue valued, and shall give you what the experts think it worth." To these words I replied with too much daring and a touch of indignation, which is always out of place in dealing with great princes. "How is it possible that my work should be valued at its proper worth when there is not a man in Florence capable of performing it?" That increased his irritation. He uttered many furious phrases, and among them said, "There is in Florence at this day a man well able to make such a statue, and who is therefore highly capable of judging it." He meant Bandinello, Cavaliere of San Jacopo. Then I rejoined, "My lord, your most illustrious Excellency gave me the means of producing an important and very difficult masterpiece in the midst of this, the noblest school of the world, and my work has been received with warmer praises than any other heretofore exposed before the gaze of our incomparable masters. My chief pride is the commendation of those able men who both understand and practice the arts of design, as in particular Bronzino the painter. This man set himself to work, and composed 4 sonnets couched in the choicest style, and full of honour to myself. Perhaps it was his example which moved the whole city to such a tumult of enthusiasm. I freely admit that if sculpture were his business instead of painting, then Bronzino might have been equal to a task like mine. Michel Agnolo Buonarroti, again, whom I am proud to call my master, he, I admit, could have achieved the same success when he was young, but not with less fatigue and trouble than I endured. But now that he is far advanced in years, he would most certainly be found unequal to the strain. Therefore I think I am justified in saying that no man known upon this earth could have produced my Perseus. For the rest, my work has received the greatest reward I could have wished for in this world, chiefly and especially because your most illustrious Excellency not only expressed yourself satisfied, but praised it far more highly than any one beside. What greater and more honourable prize could be desired by me? I affirm most emphatically that your Excellency could not pay me with more glorious coin, nor add from any treasury a wealth surpassing this. Therefore I hold myself overpaid already, and return thanks to your most illustrious Excellency with all my heart." The Duke made answer: "Probably you think I have not the money to pay you. For my part, I promise you that I shall pay you more for the statue than it is worth." Then I retorted: "I did not picture to my fancy any better recompense from your Excellency. Yet I account myself amply remunerated for that first reward which the school of Florence gave me. With this to console me, I shall take my departure on the instant, without returning to the house you gave me, and shall never seek to set foot in this town again." We were just at San Felicita, and his Excellency was proceeding to the palace. When he heard these choleric words, he turned upon me in stern anger and exclaimed: "You shall not go! Take heed you do not go!" Half terrified, I then followed him to the palace. On arriving there, his Excellency sent for the Archbishop of Pisa, named De Bartolini, and Messer Pandolfo della Stufa, requesting them to order Bascio Bandinelli in his name to examine well my Perseus and value it, since he wished to pay its exact price. These excellent men went forthwith and performed their embassy. In reply, Bandinello said that he had examined the statue minutely, and knew well enough what it was worth, but having been on bad terms otherwise with me for some time past, he did not care to be entangled anyhow in my affairs. Then they began to put a gentle pressure on him, saying: "The Duke ordered us to tell you, under pain of his displeasure, that you are to value the statue, and you may have 2 or 3 days to consider your estimate. When you have done so, tell us at what price it ought to be paid." He answered that his judgment was already formed, that he could not disobey the Duke, and that my work was rich and beautiful and excellent in execution. Therefore he thought 16,000 crowns or more would not be an excessive price for it. Those good and courteous gentlemen reported this to the Duke, who was mightily enraged. They also told the same to me. I replied that nothing in the world would induce me to take praise from Bandinello, seeing that this bad man speaks ill of everybody. My words were carried to the Duke, and that was the reason why the Duchess wanted me to place the matter in her hands. All that I have written is the pure truth. I will only add that I ought to have trusted to her intervention, for then I should have been quickly paid, and should have received so much more into the bargain. Chapter 98. The Duke sent me word by Messer Lelio Torello, his Master of the Rolls, that he wanted me to execute some bas-reliefs in bronze for the choir of San Maria del Fiore. Now the choir was by Bandinello, and I did not choose to enrich his bad work with my labours. He had not indeed designed it, for he understood nothing whatever about architecture. The design was given by Giuliano, the son of that Bascio di Agnolo, the woodcarver, who spoiled the cupola. Suffice it to say that it shows no talent. For both reasons I was determined not to undertake the task, although I told the Duke politely that I would do whatever his most illustrious Excellency ordered. Accordingly, he put the matter into the hands of the Board of Works for San Maria del Fiore, telling them to come to an agreement with me. He would continue my allowance of 200 crowns a year, while they were to supply the rest out of their funds. In due course I came before the board, and they told me what the Duke had arranged. Feeling that I could explain my views more frankly to these gentlemen, I began by demonstrating that so many histories in bronze would cost a vast amount of money, which would be totally thrown away, giving all my reasons, which they fully appreciated. In the first place, I said that the construction of the choir was altogether incorrect, without proportion, art, convenience, grace, or good design. In the next place, the bas-reliefs would have to stand too low, beneath the proper line of vision. They would become a place for dogs to piss at and be always full of ordure. Consequently, I declined positively to execute them. However, since I did not wish to throw away the best years of my life, and was eager to serve his most illustrious Excellency, whom I had the sincerest desire to gratify and obey, I made the following proposal: "Let the Duke, if he wants to employ my talents, give me the middle door of the cathedral to perform in bronze. This would be well seen, and would confer far more glory on his most illustrious Excellency. I would bind myself by contract to receive no remuneration unless I produced something better than the finest of the baptistry doors. But if I completed it according to my promise, then I was willing to have it valued, and to be paid 1,000 crowns less than the estimate made by experts." The members of the board were well pleased with this suggestion, and went at once to report the matter to the Duke, among them being Piero Salviati. They expected him to be extremely gratified with their communication, but it turned out just the contrary. He replied that I was always wanting to do the exact opposite of what he bade me, and so Piero left him without coming to any conclusion. On hearing this, I went off to the Duke at once, who displayed some irritation when he saw me. However, I begged him to condescend to hear me, and he replied that he was willing. I then began from the beginning, and used such convincing arguments that he saw at last how the matter really stood, since I made it evident that he would only be throwing a large sum of money away. Then I softened his temper by suggesting that if his most illustrious Excellency did not care to have the door begun, 2 pulpits had anyhow to be made for the choir, and that these would both of them be considerable works, which would confer glory on his reign. For my part, I was ready to execute a great number of bronze bas reliefs with appropriate decorations. In this way I brought him round, and he gave me orders to construct the models. Accordingly, I set at work on several models, and bestowed immense pains on them. Among these there was one with 8 panels, carried out with far more science than the rest, and which seemed to me more fitted for the purpose. Having taken them several times to the place, His Excellency sent word by Messer Cesare, the keeper of his wardrobe, that I should leave them there. After the Duke had inspected them, I perceived that he had selected the least beautiful. One day he sent for me, and during our conversation about the models, I gave many reasons why the octagonal pulpit would be far more convenient for its destined uses, and would produce a much finer effect. He answered that he wished me to make it square, because he liked that form better, and thus he went on conversing for some time very pleasantly. I, meanwhile, lost no opportunity of saying everything I could in the interests of art. Now, whether the Duke knew that I had spoken the truth, or whether he wanted to have his own way, a long time passed before I heard anything more about it. Chapter 99. About this time the great block of marble arrived, which was intended for the Neptune. It had been brought up the Arno, and then by the Greve, to the road at Poggio a Caiano, in order to be carried to Florence by that level way, and there I went to see it. Now I knew very well that the Duchess, by her special influence, had managed to have it given to Bandinello. No envy prompted me to dispute his claims, but rather pity for that poor unfortunate piece of marble. Observe, by the way, that everything, whatever it may be, which is subject to an evil destiny, although one tries to save it from some manifest evil, falls at once into far worse plight, as happened to this marble when it came into the hands of Bartolomeo Ammanato, of whom I shall speak the truth in its proper place. After inspecting this most splendid block, I measured it in every direction, and on returning to Florence, made several little models suited to its proportions. Then I went to Poggio a Caiano, where the Duke and Duchess were staying with their son the Prince. I found them all at table, the Duke and Duchess dining in a private apartment, so I entered into conversation with the Prince. We had been speaking for a long while, when the Duke, who was in a room adjacent, heard my voice, and condescended very graciously to send for me. When I presented myself before their Excellencies, the Duchess addressed me in a very pleasant tone, and having thus opened the conversation, I gradually introduced the subject of that noble block of marble I had seen. I then proceeded to remark that their ancestors had brought the magnificent school of Florence to such a pitch of excellence only by stimulating competition among artists in their several branches. It was thus that the wonderful cupola and the lovely doors of San Giovanni had been produced, together with those multitudes of handsome edifices and statues which made a crown of artistic glory for their city, above anything the world had seen since the days of the ancients. Upon this the Duchess, with some anger, observed that she very well knew what I meant, and bade me never mention that block of marble in her presence, since she did not like it. I replied, "So then, you do not like me to act as the attorney of your Excellencies, and to do my utmost to ensure your being better served?" "Reflect upon it, my lady. If your most illustrious Excellencies think fit to open the model for a Neptune to competition, although you are resolved to give it to Bandinello, this will urge Bandinello, for his own credit, to display greater art and science than if he knew he had no rivals. In this way, my princess, you will be far better served, and will not discourage our school of artists. You will be able to perceive which of us is eager to excel in the grand style of our noble calling, and will show yourselves princes who enjoy and understand the fine arts." The Duchess, in a great rage, told me that I tired her patience out. She wanted the marble for Bandinello, adding, "Ask the Duke, for his Excellency also means Bandinello to have it." When the Duchess had spoken, the Duke, who had kept silence up to this time, said, "20 years ago I had that fine block quarried especially for Bandinello, and so I mean that Bandinello shall have it to do what he likes with it." I turned to the Duke and spoke as follows: "My lord, I entreat your most illustrious Excellency to lend a patient hearing while I speak 4 words in your service." He told me to say all I wanted, and that he would listen. Then I began: "You will remember, my lord, that the marble which Bandinello used for his Hercules and Cacus was quarried for our incomparable Michel Agnolo Buonarroti. He had made the model for a Samson with 4 figures, which would have been the finest masterpiece in the whole world. But your Bandinello got out of it only 2 figures, both ill executed and bungled in the worst manner. Wherefore our school still exclaims against the great wrong which was done to that magnificent block. I believe that more than 1,000 sonnets were put up in abuse of that detestable performance, and I know that your most illustrious Excellency remembers the fact very well. Therefore, my powerful prince, seeing how the men to whose care that work was entrusted, in their want of taste and wisdom, took Michel Agnolo's marble away from him and gave it to Bandinello, who spoilt it in the way the world knows, or will you suffer this far more splendid block, although it belongs to Bandinello, to remain in the hands of that man who cannot help mangling it, instead of giving it to some artist of talent capable of doing it full justice? Arrange, my lord, that everyone who likes shall make a model, and have them all exhibited to the school. You will then hear what the school thinks. Your own good judgment will enable you to select the best. In this way, finally, you will not throw away your money, nor discourage a band of artists, the like of whom is not to be found at present in the world, and who form the glory of your most illustrious Excellency." The Duke listened with the utmost graciousness. Then he rose from the table, and turning to me said, "Go, my Benvenuto, make a model, and earn that fine marble for yourself. For what you say is the truth, and I acknowledge it." The Duchess tossed her head defiantly, and muttered I know not what angry sentences. I made them a respectful bow, and returned to Florence, burning with eagerness to set hands upon my model. End of section 19.